The streets of Beijing shimmered under the golden hue of the setting sun. A stark contrast to the storm brewing in Xi's heart. As she walked briskly past bustling cafes and street vendors, her thoughts swirled with memories of her first encounter with Han. It had been an ordinary day at the real estate office where she worked as a marketing executive. Han, a tall man with an air of quiet confidence, had walked in with questions about an investment property. From the moment he smiled at her, something electric sparked between them. She knew he was married. The gold band on his finger glinted like a warning light. But she dismissed it. At first, she convinced herself it was harmless, an innocent flirtation. Yet, as days turned into weeks, their professional conversations became more personal. And before long, they found themselves in the intimacy of a secluded hotel room. You deserve the world, Han had whispered one night as they lay entwined. His voice carried promises he was never sure he could keep. One day, I'll make this right, just wait for me. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. But believing came at a cost. Now, months later, she stood at the crossroads of hope and despair. Her belly, once flat and unnoticed, now carried undeniable proof of their relationship, a child. The child was a gift to her but a burden to Han. A man shackled by a marriage he claimed was lifeless. Across town, in a spacious but sterile apartment, Yang placed a steaming pot of tea on the table. The silence in her home had grown deafening in recent months. Han's late nights, his distracted demeanor, the faint traces of perfume she didn't own, all of it painted a picture she didn't want to see. For years, Yang had been the dutiful wife. She supported Han during his career ups and downs, helped him build his business, and maintained the facade of a happy family. But the cracks were becoming impossible to ignore. A quiet determination replaced the hurt in her heart. If there was another woman, Yang would find out, and she would not go down without a fight. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her best friend. Mei-Lin, I heard something strange today about Han. Call me. Yang stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. She picked up the phone and dialed. In a modest apartment not far from Yang's luxurious home, Han scrolled through pictures on his phone, photos of she laughing under cherry blossoms, and a blurry image of her ultrasound. His chest tightened with guilt and longing. He had never intended for things to go this far. Han thought of his wife. Yang had been his partner through everything, a woman of intelligence and strength. Yet, their connection had dulled over the years, replaced by routine and unspoken resentments. With she, he felt alive again, reckless and free. But freedom came with a price. The money he had siphoned from his business to support she was becoming harder to conceal. Yang's meticulous nature meant she would eventually notice. He needed to make a decision soon. But every option seemed like a betrayal, to his wife, to she, or to himself. A week later, the three lives collided in an unexpected confrontation. Yang had traced Han's steps through credit card receipts and phone records. That evening, she stood outside a small cafe, watching through the window as Han leaned toward she, their heads close in whispered conversation. The sight was a dagger to her heart. But it also steeled her resolve. The moment Yang entered, the air seemed to freeze. Han looked up, his face paling, while she's eyes darted between them, trying to assess the situation. Yang's voice was calm but laced with venom. So, this is her, she said, locking eyes with she, the woman who thinks she can take what isn't hers. She straightened, meeting Yang's gaze. I'm not just some woman. I'm carrying his child. The words hung heavy in the air. Han's world crumbled as he stammered incoherently, caught between the two women. Yang laughed bitterly. A child? You think that changes anything? You'll never have what I built with him. Never. She's composure cracked. What you built is already gone. He doesn't love you anymore. He loves me. The tension escalated until Han, desperate to regain control, stood and placed a hand on Yang's shoulder. Enough. Not here. Yang brushed his hand off. We'll finish this at home, she said, her voice cold. Turning to she added, and you'll regret ever thinking you could win. The days following the confrontation were a blur of accusations and threats. Han tried to placate both women, But his lies only deepened the divide. She, frustrated by Han's inaction, decided to take matters into her own hands. One evening, she arrived unannounced at Yang's doorstep. Yang opened the door, her expression a mix of curiosity and disdain. "What do you want?" Yang asked, crossing her arms. She held up her phone, displaying a bank transfer screen. 1.2 million yuan. "That's my offer for your divorce." Yang raised an eyebrow, impressed by the audacity. "You think my marriage has a price tag?" She smirked. "Everyone has a price. Take the money, and you'll never have to see me or him again." Yang hesitated. The offer was tempting, not because of the money, but because it gave her the power to decide how this story would end. She stepped aside, letting Shi in. "Transfer it now," Yang said, her voice firm. "Then we'll see." She didn't hesitate. Within minutes, the transaction was complete. "Congratulations," she said, standing to leave. "You're free." Yang watched her go, a small smile playing on her lips. Freedom, Yang thought, wasn't something money could buy, but it was something she intended to claim on her own terms. She stared out of her office window, her phone in hand. She scrolled through her gallery, stopping at a picture of Han. His confident smile, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, it was intoxicating. She let out a sigh, replaying their first meeting in her mind. Han had walked into her office that day wearing a tailored suit, his presence commanding the room. He was looking for an investment property, and she had been assigned to guide him. Their first meeting was professional but charged with an energy she couldn't quite define. "Ms. Shi," Han had said as they concluded their first meeting, "you're not just a talented professional. You're captivating." The compliment lingered in her mind long after he left. Their subsequent meetings blurred the line between professional and personal, leading to late-night texts and stolen moments. By the time she realized how deeply she was entangled, it was too late. Han felt like he was living two lives. By day, he was the devoted husband, attending business meetings and family gatherings with Yang. By night, he was a man lost in Shi's world, a world that felt freer, less suffocating. But the thrill of secrecy came with its own burdens. Han was meticulous about hiding his affair, deleting messages and making excuses for his absences. Yang, however, wasn't easily fooled. She noticed the subtle changes, his distracted glances, his sudden need to step out during dinner to take work calls. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table, Yang asked casually, "Do you ever think about us? Where we're going?" Han looked up, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "We're fine." Yang's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Are we?" She couldn't contain her excitement as she held up the ultrasound photo. She had rehearsed this moment in her head countless times. Tonight, she would tell Han the news. When they met at their usual cafe, she slid the photo across the table. Han picked it up, his face a mix of shock and something else she couldn't quite place. "You're pregnant?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes." She reached for his hand. "This is our chance, Han. We can start fresh, together." Han pulled his hand away, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape. This wasn't part of the plan." "Plan?" Her voice cracked. "What plan? You said you loved me. You said we'd be together." "I do love you," he said quickly, "but it's complicated." She felt the sting of his words. "Complicated? You mean your wife?" Han looked down, unable to meet her gaze. "I need time to think." Yang didn't need concrete evidence to know something was wrong. It was in the way Han avoided her gaze, the way his phone was suddenly always on silent. She decided to investigate. Late one night, when Han was asleep, she unlocked his phone. The messages she found confirmed her worst fears. Words of affection, plans to meet. Each text was a dagger to her heart. But Yang didn't cry. Instead, she formulated a plan. The next morning, she kissed Han on the cheek as he left for work. "Have a good day," she said, her voice warm and steady. But inside, she was already preparing for battle. As the months passed, Han's double life began to take its toll. She became more demanding, wanting assurances that he would leave Yang. Meanwhile, Yang played the part of the unsuspecting wife, all the while gathering evidence. Han's once thriving business began to suffer as he diverted funds to support She. He purchased her a car, rented an apartment, and even covered her medical bills. The financial strain didn't go unnoticed by Yang, who managed their household finances. One evening, as they sat down to review their accounts, Yang asked, "Where's the money going, Han? The numbers aren't adding up." Han stammered, "It's investments. You know how volatile the market is." Yang didn't press further, but she knew he was lying. She's patience wore thin, Han's promises felt empty, and she was tired of waiting. She decided to take matters into her own hands. One afternoon, she showed up at Han's office unannounced. His secretary tried to stop her, but she pushed past, barging into his office. "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling with anger. Han closed the door quickly, his face pale. "You can't just show up here. I'm done waiting," she said, her voice rising. "You keep saying you'll leave her. But you haven't. Do you even want to be with me?" "Of course I do," he said, glancing nervously at the door. "But these things take time." She crossed her arms. "Time is something I don't have. Han, I'm raising your child alone while you play house with her. This isn't fair." Yang's patience finally paid off. She had hired a private investigator who provided her with photographs, receipts, and detailed reports of Han's affair. As she flipped through the file, her anger boiled over, but Yang didn't confront Han immediately. She wanted to wait for the perfect moment. That moment came at a family gathering. In front of their relatives, Yang casually mentioned, "Han, why don't you tell everyone about your new investment? The one you've been spending so much on." Han froze, his face turning a shade of crimson. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do," Yang said, her smile sharp. Isn't it?" The room fell silent. Han stammered, searching for an excuse, but Yang didn't give him a chance. She stood, holding the file for everyone to see. "This is what he's been doing behind my back. Supporting another woman while I've been here. Keeping our family together." Han left the gathering in disgrace. But Yang wasn't done with him yet. She felt like her world was crumbling. Han's visits became less frequent, his excuses more transparent. She knew Yang had discovered the affair, and it was only a matter of time before everything fell apart. In a final act of desperation, she reached out to Yang directly. She wanted to end this once and for all, even if it meant paying a price she couldn't afford. She's nerves were frayed as she stood outside Yang's home. The building was a sharp contrast to her modest apartment, a grand, modern structure that spoke of wealth and stability. Yet, for all its beauty, she saw it as a prison. The place that kept Han bound to a life he no longer wanted. Or so she believed. Yang opened the door, her expression a mix of curiosity and disdain. She didn't wait for an invitation, stepping into the foyer with an air of defiance. "We need to talk," she said, clutching her handbag tightly. Yang crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "About what? Stealing my husband? Or ruining my family? I'm offering you a way out," she snapped, her voice trembling. She pulled out her phone, showing Yang the bank transfer app. 1.2 million yuan. "That's how much I'm willing to pay for your divorce." For a moment, Yang said nothing. Then, a slow, incredulous smile spread across her face. "You think you can buy my marriage? My life? I think we both know it's over," she said, trying to sound confident. "Why not take the money and move on?" Yang stepped closer, her voice low and cutting. "You have no idea what you've walked into. Do you? This isn't just about money. But if you're so eager to pay, fine, transfer the money now." She hesitated for a fraction of a second before opening the app and completing the transaction. She showed Yang the confirmation screen. "It's done. Now keep your promise." Yang watched her leave, her expression unreadable. Once the door closed, she checked her phone, confirming the transfer. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Fool," she muttered. That evening, Han returned home to find Yang sitting at the dining table. The evidence of his affair spread out before her like a tableau of his failures. His stomach churned. "Yang," he began, but she silenced him with a raised hand. "Sit," she commanded. He obeyed, his palms sweating. I met Shi today, Yang said, her voice calm but edged with steel. She offered me 1.2 million yuan to leave you. Han's eyes widened. What? I didn't. She paid it, Yang interrupted, sliding her phone across the table to show the transaction. I took her money. But let me be clear, you're not worth a fraction of it. Han's face turned red. Yang, I never asked her to do that. No, but you've asked for plenty without saying a word. Yang said, her voice rising. You've stolen from me. From us. And for what? A fantasy? A woman who thinks throwing money around can erase the mess you've made. Han buried his face in his hands, the weight of his decisions crushing him. I'm sorry, I never wanted this to happen. Yang stood, gathering the documents. Sorry doesn't fix this. But don't worry, I'll make sure you pay for everything you've done. She waited anxiously for news. She imagined Yang presenting the divorce papers to Han. Imagined Han's relief as he signed them. Soon, they would be free to start their lives together. She dreamed of a small wedding, a cozy home, and a future where their child would grow up in a loving family. Days turned into weeks, and there was no word from Han. Her messages went unanswered, her calls ignored. Frustration boiled over into rage. She had paid her price. Why wasn't Yang holding up her end of the deal? Shi's patience finally snapped. She contacted a lawyer and filed a lawsuit against Yang, demanding the return of the 1.2 million yuan. The case attracted attention, becoming the talk of the community. Headlines painted Shi as a homewrecker and Yang as a cunning wife who outplayed her rival. The courtroom was packed on the day of the hearing. Shi sat with her lawyer, her expression steely. Yang arrived with her own legal team, her demeanor calm and composed. Han, caught in the middle, sat in the back, his head bowed. Shi's lawyer began, presenting the case as a simple breach of contract. My client paid Mrs. Yang 1.2 million yuan with the understanding that she would file for divorce. Mrs. Yang has failed to fulfill this agreement and must return the funds. Yang's lawyer countered with a scathing argument. This so-called agreement is not a legally binding contract. It was a verbal arrangement, made with the intention of disrupting a lawful marriage, a purpose that is not only unethical but also illegal under Chinese law. The judge listened carefully, his expression neutral. When it was Yang's turn to speak, she stood confidently. I took the money, Yang admitted, her voice firm, but not as part of any agreement. It was a gift, one that I had no obligation to honor. And let's not forget, the plaintiff's actions were an attempt to destroy my marriage. Should the law reward such behavior? The courtroom fell silent as the judge delivered his ruling. The court finds that the transfer of 1.2 million yuan does not constitute a binding contract. Furthermore, the plaintiff's intention to interfere in a lawful marriage is a violation of public policy. The claim is dismissed. She sat in stunned silence as the judge's words sank in. The room erupted into murmurs, but all she could hear was the pounding of her own heart. Yang turned to leave, a small, satisfied smile on her lips. As she passed she whispered, I told you you'd regret it. During the proceedings, a financial audit revealed that Han had secretly transferred over 6 million yuan to Shi over the course of their relationship. The revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Yang's lawyer seized on this new information. Mrs. Yang has a rightful claim to these funds as part of the marital estate. We intend to pursue legal action to recover them. Han looked as though he had aged 10 years. She felt her stomach drop. The money she had once seen as a token of Han's love now loomed over her as a source of potential ruin. She returned home to find reporters camped outside her building. She slipped past them, her mind racing. She had lost everything, her money, her reputation, and the dream of a future with Han. Yang, meanwhile, felt a sense of vindication. She had fought back against the betrayal and emerged stronger. But the battle wasn't over. She still had to decide what to do about Han. Han sat alone in a dingy motel room, nursing a drink. He had lost his wife, his lover, and his dignity. For the first time in years, he was forced to confront the man he had become. The glare of camera flashes greeted Shi as she stepped out of her apartment building. Reporters clamored for her attention, their voices a cacophony of judgment and curiosity. Ms. Shi, do you regret your actions? Do you plan to appeal the court's decision? She kept her head down, her sunglasses hiding tear-streaked eyes. The whispers and stares of her neighbors burned into her back as she hurried to her car. Inside, she collapsed against the steering wheel, her body trembling with sobs. The dream she had clung to so tightly had turned into a nightmare. Bills piled up on her kitchen counter. Without Han's financial support, she struggled to make ends meet. The money she had received from him, a lifeline she hadn't questioned before, was now a ticking time bomb. If Young pursued legal action to reclaim it, she had no idea how she would repay it. Her phone buzzed, and she hesitated before picking it up. It was a message from Han. Han, I'm sorry for everything. I need time to think. She stared at the screen, her anger flaring. Time to think? She muttered bitterly. That's all you ever needed. Young sat in her lawyer's office, flipping through documents that detailed Han's financial misdeeds. The betrayal was deeper than she had imagined. Over 6 million yuan, siphoned away to fund his affair. It wasn't just money, it was a theft of trust, security, and years of hard work. Her lawyer cleared his throat. We have a strong case to recover these funds, Mrs. Young. Given the evidence, the court will likely rule in your favor. Young nodded, her expression resolute. Do it. Every yuan he gave her was ours. She doesn't deserve it, and neither does he. But reclaiming the money wasn't enough. Young had to decide the future of her marriage. Han had begged for forgiveness after the trial, promising to make amends. Part of her wanted to believe him, for the sake of their shared history and their child. But the other part of her, the part that had endured months of lies, knew better. That evening, Young sat at her dining table, pen in hand, staring at the divorce papers. The power to end this chapter of her life was in her hands. She just had to decide when to sign. Han's days were a blur of regret and self-loathing. The once proud businessman now spent his nights in a dingy motel, nursing cheap whiskey and avoiding phone calls. His world had collapsed, and he had no one to blame but himself. He thought of Young, her unwavering strength even in the face of his betrayal. He thought of she, her fiery passion now turned to resentment. And he thought of the child he had yet to meet, an innocent caught in the crossfire of his mistakes. One night, as he stared at his reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror, Han made a decision. He couldn't undo the past, but he could try to make things right. The first step was to face the consequences of his actions. No more running. No more excuses. She sat in a dimly lit room, staring at a piece of paper. It was a job application, one of many she had filled out in recent weeks. The fallout from the trial had cost her not only her savings but also her reputation. Few employers wanted to hire someone embroiled in such a scandal. But she refused to give up. She had her child to think about, a baby boy with Han's eyes and her determination. She found solace in small victories, like securing a part-time job at a local boutique and enrolling in night classes to learn accounting. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope. One afternoon, as she walked home from work, she passed a park where children played on swings and slides. She imagined her son running and laughing there one day. The thought brought a smile to her face, a reminder that her life, though battered, was far from over. The court ruled in Yang's favor. Han was ordered to repay the 6 million yuan he had transferred to Shi, and she was held liable for any remaining funds she had not spent. Yang felt a sense of vindication as the judge delivered the verdict. Justice, at least in part, had been served, but the victory was bittersweet. That evening, Yang sat alone in her living room, sipping tea and reflecting on what she had gained, and what she had lost. The money would help secure her and her child's future, but it couldn't erase the scars of betrayal. When Han knocked on her door that night, Yang was surprised to see him. He looked gaunt, his usual confidence replaced with a humility she had never seen before. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, Han said, his voice breaking. For everything. Yang stared at him, her emotions a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and a faint glimmer of pity. Sorry doesn't fix what you've done, she said, but thank you for saying it. Han nodded, turning to leave. If there's ever a way to make this right, let me know. Yang watched him walk away, feeling a weight lift from her chest. She didn't need him to make things right. She was already doing it on her own. Han decided to focus on rebuilding his life. He sold his share of the business to repay Yang and moved into a small apartment. The process was humbling, but it gave him a sense of purpose. He reached out to Shi, offering financial support for their child. At first, she refused, her pride bruised by everything that had happened. But eventually, she accepted, realizing that their son deserved a connection to his father, even if she wanted nothing to do with Han. Over time, Han became a regular presence in his son's life. The relationship was tentative, built on fragile trust, but it was a start. Shi and Yang's lives moved in parallel but separate directions. She continued her journey of self-reliance, determined to give her son a better life. Yang, now officially divorced, found fulfillment in her career and in raising her child with love and strength. Though their paths occasionally crossed, at court hearings, in shared social circles, they rarely spoke. The wounds were too deep, the history too painful, but there was one thing they shared: a determination to never let the past define them. Shi's small apartment was modest but tidy, a reflection of the new life she was building. The walls were adorned with pictures of her son, now a year old, his wide smile a daily reminder of why she kept going. Every morning, she juggled work and school, pushing herself to create a stable future. The nights were the hardest. When the house was quiet, and her son was asleep, she often found herself revisiting her mistakes. The affair, the lawsuit, the humiliation, it all felt like a different life. But she couldn't afford to dwell on the past. Her focus was on what lay ahead. One evening, after putting her son to bed, she received a call from her mother. They hadn't spoken much since the scandal, but the conversation was warm. Her mother's voice, full of encouragement, reminded she that she wasn't alone. "You're stronger than you think," her mother said, "and you're doing the right thing for your son." She hung up, feeling a surge of determination. She didn't need Han or anyone else to validate her worth. She would stand on her own. Yang's home felt emptier without Han, but it was a welcome change. The divorce had been finalized, and she was free to live life on her terms. She poured her energy into her career, earning a promotion that came with a significant pay raise. It was a testament to her resilience and ability to rise above adversity. Her son, now a teenager, often asked about his father. Yang answered truthfully but carefully, ensuring he understood the complexity of the situation without fostering resentment. One weekend, Yang took her son to a local community center, where she had begun volunteering. Teaching financial literacy to women in need became her passion, a way to channel her experiences into something meaningful. During one of the sessions, a young woman approached her. "You're amazing," the woman said. "I heard your story. You inspire me to keep going." Yang smiled, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. Her struggles had not been in vain. They had given her the strength to help others. Han's life was unrecognizable from what it had been 2 years ago. His luxurious lifestyle was gone, replaced by the simplicity of a small apartment and a used car. He worked as a consultant, rebuilding his reputation piece by piece. But the most significant change was his relationship with his son. Though strained at first, Han made a consistent effort to be present. He attended school events, helped with homework, and learned how to be a father in ways he had never been before. One day, as they played soccer in the park, his son turned to him and said, "I like it when you're around, Dad." Han's throat tightened. It was the validation he hadn't realized he craved. For the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path. She hadn't seen Han in over a year when he showed up at her workplace unexpectedly. Her initial reaction was one of irritation. What could he possibly want now? "I'm not here to disrupt your life," Han said, sensing her tension. "I just wanted to say thank you for letting me be part of our son's life." She studied him, noting the changes. He looked bolder, more subdued. The arrogance that once defined him was gone, replaced by a quiet humility. "You're doing the bare minimum of what a father should do," she replied coolly. "Don't expect me to applaud you for that." Han nodded. "Fair enough, but I'm trying." As he left, she felt a pang of something she couldn't quite define. She didn't forgive him. She didn't think she ever could. but she acknowledged that he was making an effort. And for their son's sake. That was enough. Yang received an invitation to a charity gala, an event she usually avoided. But this time, she decided to go, if only to reconnect with old friends. The evening was elegant, filled with laughter and conversation. And for the first time in years, Yang felt truly at ease. Toward the end of the night, she spotted Han across the room. He was alone, nursing a drink and looking out of place. Their eyes met, and he gave a small, hesitant wave. Yang approached him, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Didn't expect to see you here. Han smiled faintly. I was invited by a former client. Thought it might be good for business. They talked for a while, their conversation polite but distant. As the evening wound down, Han said, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope you know I regret everything. Yang regarded him for a long moment. Regret doesn't change the past, Han, but maybe it can change the future. With that, she walked away, leaving him to ponder her words. She's hard work began to pay off. She secured a full-time position as an accountant and moved into a better apartment. Her son thrived in school, his laughter filling their home with joy. One evening, as she tucked him into bed, he asked, Mommy, are you happy? The question caught her off guard. She thought about it for a moment before replying. I think I'm getting there. Her son beamed. Good. Because I'm happy. She kissed his forehead, her heart swelling with love. In that moment, she realized that happiness wasn't about perfection. It was about progress. Yang's work at the community center grew into something much larger. She launched an initiative to support women facing financial and emotional challenges, using her own story as a source of inspiration. At the initiative's first anniversary celebration, she stood before a crowd of supporters, her son by her side. We all face trials, she said, but it's how we rise from them that defines us. This is our chance to rise together. The applause was thunderous. Yang smiled, knowing she had found her purpose. Years later, she and Yang crossed paths at a school event. Their sons had become friends. A twist of fate neither had expected. The two women exchanged polite smiles, their shared history unspoken but understood. As the event ended, she approached Yang. Thank you, she said softly. For what? Yang asked, surprised. For showing me what strength looks like. Yang nodded, her expression warm. You found your own strength. Don't forget that. As they parted ways, both women felt a sense of peace. Their lives, though scarred by the past, were richer for the lessons they had learned. Years had passed since the events that had entangled Yang, and Han in a web of betrayal, heartbreak, and consequences. Time, as it often does, softened the sharp edges of pain and allowed for healing. Though their lives had diverged, the impact of their choices lingered, shaping who they had become. She stood in her modest but bright kitchen, preparing breakfast while her now 8-year-old son chatted animatedly about a science project. He had inherited Han's sharp mind and her fiery determination, qualities that filled her with pride. Her career as an accountant had flourished. She had worked her way up in a respected firm and even started offering pro bono services to single mothers struggling with finances. Her own experience had taught her the value of resilience, and she was determined to pass it on. As she watched her son devour his breakfast, she felt a deep sense of contentment. The road had been long and arduous, but she had built a life filled with purpose and love. Yang's initiative, now named the Phoenix Project, had grown into a national movement, empowering women across China. She traveled frequently to speak at conferences and workshops, sharing her story to inspire others. Her son, now in college, often joined her at events, offering his own perspective on resilience and family. Their bond had only deepened over the years, strengthened by their shared journey. One evening, as she prepared for another speaking engagement, she received a letter from Han. It was brief. I wanted to thank you. It read, for being stronger than I ever was. You turned our pain into something beautiful. And I'll always admire that. Yang smiled as she folded the letter. It was a quiet acknowledgement of their past and a reminder of how far she had come. Han lived a simpler life now, far removed from the luxury and chaos of his past. He had opened a small consulting firm, specializing in helping struggling businesses. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave him a sense of purpose. His relationship with his son had become the cornerstone of his life. They spent weekends hiking, playing chess, or simply talking. Han often marveled at the boy's insight and kindness, traits he credited to Shi. One day, while visiting his son, Han crossed paths with Yang. They exchanged pleasantries, their conversation cordial but distant. As she walked away, Han felt a pang of gratitude. She had been his greatest ally and his greatest critic, and he knew he owed much of his redemption to the lessons she had taught him. The annual Phoenix Project Gala was a grand affair, drawing dignitaries, activists, and supporters from across the country. Both Shi and Han had been invited, a testament to the complexity of their shared history. She arrived early, her son by her side, looking radiant in a simple yet elegant dress. Han arrived later, blending into the crowd, content to observe. When Yang took the stage to deliver her keynote speech, both Shi and Han listened intently, their emotions a mix of pride and nostalgia. Yang spoke with passion, her words resonating with everyone in the room. "We all have the power to rise from the ashes," she said. "No matter how deep the fall, there is always a way forward." After her speech, Yang approached Shi and Han, her expression warm but composed. For the first time in years, the three stood together, their shared history palpable but no longer oppressive. "To new beginnings," Yang said, raising her glass. "To new beginnings," Shi and Han echoed. As the night wound down, the three parted ways, each walking toward their own futures. She left with her son, her heart light. Yang stayed to mingle with supporters, her purpose shining brightly. Han watched them from a distance, a quiet smile on his face. Their lives would never be the same, but they had found peace in their own ways. The wounds of the past had healed, leaving behind scars that served as reminders of their strength and resilience. And as they moved forward, they carried with them the lessons of love, loss, and the enduring power of hope.